Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about my auto by authors because I've just been kind of doing some kind of admin-y stuff today, making sure all my notes are up to date, looking at the pre-orders I have set out for the year, all of those kinds of things, which explains why I look a little bit of a mess today. It's been just a kind of job hunting and updating my bullet journal kind of a day, but I've been thinking about the pre-orders that I have coming for the rest of the year, and some of them I'm so excited about, but I thought it would be fun to talk through my auto by authors just because I don't think I've ever done that. I've never really talked about the authors whose work I always purchase and the reasons behind that, why I love each of their particular writing styles. So I thought that would be fun to talk about today, and I have a pretty good list of authors here, including a few that aren't quite auto by authors yet but are well on their way to becoming auto by authors for me. So I think we'll just stop rambling and dive into the list because I have quite a few to talk about. The very first one I have on my list is Silvia Moreno Garcia. I've currently read Gods of Jade and Shadow, Return of the Sorceress, Mexican Gothic, and Silver Nitrate, and I've given all of these 4.5 or 5 stars. I love all of these books and they live completely rent-free in my head. And I think the thing that I love about Silvia Moreno Garcia's writing is that she does such a incredible job writing across genres, because we have like some kind of historical, mythological, fantasy, high fantasy, and then some horror, and then horror with fantasy elements, but also she's written across the noir and sci-fi genres as well, and I just am so compelled by all of her premises, and she always, at least in my experience, for my particular taste, she always like sticks the landing on whatever she's writing. And again, these books just live completely rent-free in my head. I think the characters are super vivid and compelling, and I just love the way that she writes like tension and dread, and it's just, they're so good and they're all so different. This one has such a fairy tale-esque style of writing. This one really nails the gothic tone. This like epic high fantasy thing is super short and punchy. Silver Nitrate is just so tense and dreadful, and I just cannot believe how well she writes across all of these different genres and subgenres. And so I think that's why I find her work so compelling, and I have quite a few of her books left on my shelf to read still, but these ones have firmly cemented her as a favorite author for me. Next on my list is Stephen Graham Jones, and so far I've read Mongrels, The Only Good Indians, and The Babysitter Lives from him, and I just love the actual like flow of his writing. I'm not really quite sure how to describe it exactly. I want to say conversational, but that's not quite right, but all of his books feel to me like somebody is just sitting there telling me a story. Like, it's very verbal, if that makes sense. And I also find that his characters are so realistically rendered. Like, if you told me these were real people, I would believe you, despite the werewolves and the, you know, creepy elk monsters. I would believe that these are real people. They're just so compellingly written, and they just feel so realistic and well-rounded to me, and I just thoroughly enjoy following every one of them. I'm always rooting for them. It's particularly devastating to me when they die, because obviously he writes in horror, so a lot of them do die, and these are the only 3 I've read from him so far, but I also have his Indian Lake trilogy to read, and I am beyond excited to pick up that series. So just cannot stress how much I love the way that he writes characters and the way that I feel like somebody is verbally telling me a story when I'm reading his work. Then I've got Arkady Martine, and I think her writing is super interesting because a lot of people find it quite dense, but I think I would describe it more as kind of poetic as opposed to dense. There is a lot of information and every word is so intentional. I've read this Tex Clan duology, A Memory Called Empire, and A Desolation Called Peace, one of my all-time favorite series. I have one of my favorite like video memories from any of these is that I was doing a video on Goodreads Choice Stuff when I was reading A Desolation Called Peace, and I remember filming a clip where I was like, oh, well, I'm gonna be reading this next, it should be fun. Cut to a clip of me just sobbing uncontrollably at my desk because I just finished it, and the ending of this one is so bittersweet and such a gut punch that I was completely caught off guard, and I love this series so much. This is another one that just lives rent-free in my head. And then I also read Rose House, which is just a really unsettling kind of sci-fi horror book that's a futuristic world with this like house that is itself sentient, and this one just got under my skin and creeped me out in such an interesting way. And this, again, it was just like poetic writing. Everything feels so intentional. I feel like parts of this probably went over my head, but everything that she writes just feels like she's carefully chosen every single word for the like maximum impact, and I really appreciate the intricacy of her writing. Then I've got T. Kingfisher on my list, and specifically T. Kingfisher's horror. I've also read one book that she's published under a different pen name, Ursula Vernon, but so far I've read this series, What Moves the Dead and What Feasts at Night, which is the Sworn Soldier series. I've also read The Twisted Ones, and I'm currently in the middle of The Hollow Places, and I've also read Digger Unearthed, which she wrote under Ursula Vernon, which was a kind of YA fantasy graphic novel about a wombat. So I've read all of those, and she's another person who I just love the way she writes characters. I think that they're really fun and realistic, but I also just particularly vibe with her sense of humor. All of her books have this kind of quirky sense of humor to them. The characters are a little bit funny, and I just really vibe with that. I really connect with the way that she writes characters. They have really like believable and relatable flaws to them, but also they're just kind of snarky and sarcastic, and I really appreciate that sense of humor, and especially just in her horror. I haven't actually read much of her fantasy yet, just the one graphic novel, so I'm really interested to dive into that as well and see how I feel about those books of hers, just because I haven't read any of her fantasy at all, but her horror just like is so perfectly up my alley and it entirely to my tastes that I will always and forever read any horror that she publishes. Then I've got Martha Wells, and specifically for Murderbot, I've only ever read the Murderbot series, but I do have a few of her other books now on my shelf because I just love the way that she's crafted the world of Murderbot, because it feels very like expansive and lived in, like it feels like a real world, and we're just following a single story within it. And then I also just love the way that she writes Murderbot and the supporting cast. I think she does a really great ensemble cast, and I appreciate the like struggles that Murderbot goes through. I think again Murderbot is very relatable, and I really am excited to try some of her other work, which is I think mostly fantasy. I've got Witch King and the book Valerian sitting, and City of Bones as well, sitting on my shelf ready to read, and I just am so excited to see what the characters are like in those stories, but also just to dive into the worlds that she's created, because I suspect they're going to be just as like expansive and detailed and interesting as the world of Murderbot. Next up, and I told you there were a bunch of them, I've got Shelley Parker Chan, who's written just this one series, I believe. This is the Radiant Emperor duology with She Who Became the Sun and He Who Drowned the World. This is another series like the Teixetlon duology. That one's so hard to say. It's another series like the Teixetlon duology that is just living rent-free in my head. I love it so much. It's another world that feels really lush and well realized. This is a historical fantasy set in 14th century China, and the way that Parker Chan writes characters, they're just so interesting and flawed in really compelling ways, and I just love following these terrible people making terrible decisions. They're just so interesting to read about, and I love all of the detail here. This is, I think, one of the series that has most like stuck out in my head as something that's very like visual, and like I can see the sequences happening in my mind as I'm reading. Like I think this would make a fantastic movie as well, or probably a series of movies. I don't think you could fit all of the content from both of these books into one, but given that they've only written the one series, this has firmly cemented their writing as one of my favorite styles of writing, and I will absolutely read anything else that they come out with, because this is just like so different and interesting, and this like changed me as a person. I don't think I'm the same person I was before reading this series, and I just am so fascinated by all the themes that they've packed in here as well. There's a lot of stuff about like gender and embodiment and making space for yourself in the world, and whether or not you can change an oppressive system while also adhering to that system or changing it from within. Just such an interesting set of conversations. The characters are all fantastically rendered, and I am really hoping that they write something else soon, because I just need more of this. Another author who writes some historical work, I was going to say historical fantasy, but actually it's not. It's historical mysteries, but again, still historical. June Her writes these really fantastic Korean historical mysteries that are just so fun, and there's such big emotions in them that I just cannot help but love these characters. So this one is The Silence of Bones and The Force of Stolen Girls. I've only read the two from her, but I have her third book The Red Palace sitting on my shelf, and I have to space these out because these are such gut punch kind of books. They're really deeply emotional. They're kind of slow burn mysteries where there's a mystery happening, but a lot of the focus is on like the development of the protagonist and the relationships that they have and the way that they change as a person as a part of investigating these mysteries. And these are just ones that, again, live rent-free in my head. That's, I think, one of the big things, is things that I think about a lot. Books that have some sort of theme or some sort of like atmosphere that just kind of lingers in my memory after I've read them. And I think these ones just really have that. They're really atmospheric and fun. And this one in particular, Silence of Bones, when I finished reading it, I was sobbing at my desk and I had to just like close the book and sit there quietly for a little while and process, because it was just such an emotional ending. And I kind of saw one of the twists coming, but the way that it was presented was just so brilliantly done that it got me anyway. Like, it made me cry. So I just love the way that she writes her atmosphere and settings, and the characters have such interesting personal journeys, and I'm so excited to read her next book. And she has another one coming out in a couple of months, or maybe is it next month? I don't know, very soon. I can't remember what it's called, but A Wolf Among Cranes or A Crane Among Wolves, something along those lines. But yeah, I love mysteries anyway, but these I think are definitely amongst the best historical mysteries that I've read. And now on to the final author I can say with certainty is an auto-buy for me, and it's Janice Hallett with her mixed media mysteries. I love mysteries, I love historical mysteries, I also love mixed media mysteries, and I find these to just be so much fun. These are books that I've just absolutely flown through. I've got The Appeal and its spin-off, The Christmas Appeal, and then her most recent book, The Mysterious Case of the Alberton Angels. All of these were just so damn fun. I could not put these books down. I think I read almost all of them in like a day or two, and I was just obsessed. I needed to know what happened. I love the way that the clues are sprinkled throughout like little breadcrumbs, and I just thought they were all brilliantly realized mysteries. I think the only one of hers I haven't read yet is The Twyford Code. I had an arc of it and I picked it up at just a time when I was not in the mood to be reading things for leisure outside of class, so I just really need to restart that one and give it another shot. But I'm so excited for her upcoming book, The Examiner, and I feel like these are just like really like the standard for mixed media mysteries, at least for me, because they're just so cleverly written. I have 3 more authors to mention that are all ones that I could see becoming auto-buy authors for me. I've read just like 1 or 2 books from each of them, but I'm obsessed with the way that they write their characters, the way that they write their worlds. So I'm gonna kind of mention them all at once because I think the reasons that I love these 3 are very similar. So first up, I have River Solomon. I've read so far The Deep and Sorrowland. I don't have my copy of Sorrowland on me though at the moment. Lent it to my partner so he could read it. But I just love the way that they write the characters, and these are again very intense emotional books. I think these are really difficult, but they're so worth like getting to grips with that difficulty and dealing with the really dark themes that they explore. The Deep in particular I think lives rent free in my head, but Sorrowland, the ending has like, it just emerges in my memory every once in a while, and I just have to sit there and like process it again. So I love the way that they write, and especially their endings I think are just so bittersweet in such interesting ways, and I'm really excited to read On Kindness of Ghosts because that's I think their last of their backlist that I haven't read. Next up I have Joe Abercrombie. I've only read The Blade itself from him so far. I'm currently reading Before They Are Hanged, or at least I've started it. I've read a few pages, and I'm so interested in his characters because they're also, like a lot of these other characters, just really flawed in very clearly like intentional and interesting ways. And I'm fascinated by the journeys that they're going on. I could not coherently tell you a plot for this series, but I kind of don't care because I really am just interested in seeing where all of these characters are going to end up and how they're going to get there, because they're all so different from each other. All of the characters in here are so fascinating. There's not a single perspective that I don't love reading from, and I'm impressed by his ability to write very distinct character voices so that I don't really need each chapter to tell me who is the perspective character, because I can immediately tell within a line or two who it is that I'm reading from. His characters are just so distinctive and fascinating, and I don't really care that I don't know what the plot of the series is, because I just want to know where these characters are going to end up and how they're going to get there. Finally, I have Fonda Lee on my list as a potential auto-buy author because I've read just 2 books from her so far, Jade City and Untethered Sky. This one lingers in my memory in like a very vibe specific way. I couldn't tell you much about the specifics of this book, but the themes that it deals with in terms of like grief and finding purpose after a loss really have stuck with me, just those themes. And I every once in a while kind of remember the way that this book ends, and I'm like tearing up a little bit again. And then Jade City, I think, is just so brilliant. I love urban fantasy, and this is such a cool version of that. And I love all of her characters. I love the relationships they have, because the relationships are all so complex, and I like this like broad cast of characters she's created here. This book also has, I think, the most devastating character death that I have ever read. I was literally telling someone that this character was my favorite character, and like a chapter later they died, and I was so shocked and confused, but it just recontextualized the whole book in an interesting way, and it created a new status quo for everybody that completely altered the trajectory of the story. And I was so impressed at her ability to pull that off, and I am terrified, but also super excited to dive into the rest of this series. I do feel like I need to read at least Jade War before I can like firmly say that Fonda Lee is an auto-buy, but so far so good, because I have loved both of these, and I'm so excited to dive into the rest of the Greenbone saga. So those are all of my auto-buy authors, and some that I think could definitely become auto-buy authors. I think some of the themes that I'm noticing here is characters. I really love realistically rendered characters, or characters that have really compelling and interesting flaws. I think that's something that really draws me into a story, and that tracks because I generally think of myself as a character-driven reader. I'm also noticing a trend that I like worlds that are very like expansive, and that I feel like when the book ends, that world continues on, and I'm just seeing one little story out of that world. I think that that's really compelling, and I really like purposeful writing where I feel like the words are chosen in a specific way. I think that's really what ties together like Arcady Martine's very poetic style of writing, and the more kind of oral conversational style of Stephen Graham Jones, where it feels very intentional. Both of them are choosing their words very specifically, and I just enjoy the way that that layers in so much meaning. So I think those are kind of the big things that really make an author an auto-buy author for me. And it's interesting to look at this for me, because I'm thinking about like the trends in my own reading and the things that I've been picking up lately and the reasons that I'm picking those things up. But yeah, those are all of my auto-buy authors. I would love to know in the comments below what your auto-buy authors are. Is there anybody whose writing you just like particularly love and you'll always read everything that they write? I would love to know. I'm always looking for new suggestions, and I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you have, I hope you consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.